Lexus wants $60,000 for a sports sedan built on bones a decade old. For 2026, the IS refresh adds a bigger screen, a sharper face, but the naturally aspirated V6 and the 6-speed automatic never joined the decade. So which is it? A museum piece or the last functioning exhibit before the building gets turned into a crossover showroom? By the numbers, this V6 makes 311 horsepower at 6,600 RPM and 280 pounds of torque at 4,800 RPM, which is Lexus' way of politely telling you not to drive this like it's got a turbo. Below 3,000 RPM, it drives like a smooth, docile V6. Above 4,000 RPM, and you remember why this format existed. 0 to 60 in 5.7 seconds isn't exactly slow, but in this IS 350, Lexus makes you work for it. With peak power up near redline and peak torque way up in the rev range, you definitely have to go looking for speed. This IS has something called active sound control, which means the V6's noises gets augmented by the sound system, and this is one of those rare occasions where you can slightly detect the fakery, but you actually enjoy it. The sounds are carefully tuned and the augmentation always seems to be making the right kind of noises for the driving that you're doing. Funny thing is, the V6 on its own makes some great noises that a Turbo 4 can definitely not achieve, but then Lexus decided you still needed help hearing it. No turbo means no waiting. You ask the V6 for a little more power, some acceleration, and it answers in the same instant. It's a sensation that some of you forced induction owners have been trained to forget. In this segment, in 2026, a 6-speed automatic sounds like a clerical error. The rear drive IS gets an 8-speed. This all-wheel drive model gets a transmission that Toyota already had. And I suspect that had to do with the math not mathing for building a new 8-speed for what is a relatively low-volume product like this IS 350. The thing is, you can't hate on this gearbox because it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It shifts smoothly, it is never confused, it never hangs up between gears. It does exactly what a good gearbox does. The transmission shift logic is right on point with this car. It does exactly what you tell it to do. Shift up, it shifts up. Shift down, it shifts down. You ask for a downshift mid-corner and there's a little bit of a pause, but then it complies and allows you to pick up the throttle and have fun on the exit of the corner. And that pause isn't long enough to ruin the corner. It's just there to remind you that this 6-speed has seen things. The shift paddles do work, technically speaking. They're not as responsive as a performance-tuned gearbox, that's for sure. Around town, you'll just leave them alone. When you're enjoying this in the corners, you're going to anticipate that built-in pause by downshifting a little bit earlier. With this all-wheel drive system, you have fantastic traction in low grip conditions, but it trades away that traction for one thing that would make this whole platform sing. The rear drive IS gets a mechanical limited slip diff at the back. It's not available in the all-wheel drive ISs, and yes, this has impeccable all-weather traction, but a limited slip diff at the back would make this just a touch sharper and a touch more enjoyable to throw around in the corners. The all-wheel drive IS 350 is the only one that's available in Canada, and it makes sense for many months of the year, January through March, certainly in this part of Canada, but the rest of the time I get the sense that the weight of the all-wheel drive system is something that the rest of the chassis would rather not carry. Forget the F Sport badge for just a second. What this drivetrain does really well is be serene when we're cruising, and the smoothness and the little rumble of this V6 is something that a Turbo 4 can never mimic. Subscribers get notified when our next episode drops. Everybody else leaves it to the algorithm. If you want to find out when our next episode hits YouTube, well, that's what the subscribe button does. Lexus says they revised the steering system to deepen the connection between the car and the driver. And when you strip away the press release, what that actually means is a team of engineers spent countless hours perfecting this system when the rest of the industry has just basically given up on steering feel. The ratio is surprisingly quick, and that's one of the things that makes this fun to drive, but weight builds naturally, steering's precise, and this is about as good as you're going to get when it comes to an electrically assisted steering system. With the steering, though, I'm not mistaking the very natural weighting to some actual feedback. That is on the limited side. Think of it as your sim racing wheel with the force feedback turned way down. It's still accurate, but you're not getting a lot of feel here. Thankfully, chassis feedback is excellent, and when you're enjoying this in the corners, the chassis does communicate through the seat, and you know exactly what's going on at each of the 4 contact patches. The balance between ride and handling here makes the argument for leaving good architecture in place. Sure, this architecture is old, but it still holds up. Double wishbone setup in the front, multi-link at the rear, and this is still the right way to go in 2026, and I think Lexus engineers know that. No matter what surfaces I've driven over, this Lexus, I'll hit a bump, large or small, and on the larger ones, then it just absorbs it, takes a set, and says, thanks, we're moving on. What's funny is that for something that's rolling on a set of 19s, ride quality is excellent, and I think a lot of that has to do with the suspension calibration. I think spring rates are a little on the softer side, but then when it comes to damping, these adaptive dampers do a fantastic job. There's not a lot of range to them. They're definitely on the softer side of things, but when you're throwing this around in the corners, those dampers do a fantastic job with body and wheel control in those extreme situations. Even in the most aggressive drive modes, the dampers don't firm up to the point where ride quality is going to suffer. And however they've tuned that rear suspension, it does an exceptional job of absorbing bumps, especially mid-corner bumps, because that rear end stays planted. And sure, the all-wheel drive system changes the front to rear weight distribution a little bit. It's 55% front, 45% rear. But based on that, I was expecting its near limit or on limit behavior to commit to some understeer at the limit, and that wasn't the case at all. Truth is, this is much more neutral in the corners than I thought it would be. Trail brake into a corner, and this thing is precise. Lift off mid-corner, and the nose tucks right in, gets you right on your intended line to the apex if that's what you're shooting for. But this is exceptionally precise. On the other hand, with corner exit, it's a slightly different story. And because that rear axle loves to be planted, because we don't have a lot of power or torque coming from this V6, it's very tidy on corner exit. I can pick up the throttle as much as I like, and this thing pulls out of corners exactly the way I want. The one thing it does not do is power oversteer. In a roundabout kind of way, it does exactly what a good sports sedan should do, and that is allow you to rocket out of corners. However, it doesn't do it that aggressively. For drivers like you and me, it's much more interesting on corner entry than it is on corner exit. This is one of the anomalies in the Lexus lineup, because when you push it into corners, sure, there's a little bit of body roll, but it takes a set, it's well controlled, and is happy to carve a drama-free line through a corner without any of that secondary body movement that you expect from some Lexus vehicles. Four-wheel disc brakes are here, and on this particular model, those front calipers are painted bright red. Thankfully, the calipers aren't over-promising. Feel, control, modulation, all top-notch, and even in emergency braking situations, it's drama-free. Lexus always does a very strong brake pedal, and this IS 350, no exception. The only thing I would like is a pad with a little bit more bite. Yes, I'm sure these pads are lovely in day-to-day operation, but this is a sports sedan after all, and we could use a pad here that just has a touch more bite than what it does. On the flip side of that coin, this braking system allows you to stop smoothly, and much of the credit goes to the pads. And of course, with a more aggressive pad, you're going to have a little bit more noise and a little bit more dust, and I suspect Lexus IS owners don't want either of those things. This platform clearly demonstrates that it has way more in it than this engine can deliver, and I think the IS 500 demonstrates that point perfectly. This chassis can handle much more power. If you'd like to support the channel beyond just watching, the link to the merch store is here, and your support there means more time for us to produce episodes like this and a little less time worrying about industry access. No pressure, just an option. This car was engineered in an era when they designed cabin storage to accommodate flip phones and wallets, but in 2026, it all seems to still work. The age of this architecture cannot touch the seating position. This is one of the best in the sports sedan game. You sit nice and low in the chassis. The cowl height is just perfect. You're not too low. You got great visibility. Steering wheel, right shape, right size, and just about anybody can find a perfect interface to this IS. And it's one of those seating positions that make you feel like you're sitting in a proper cockpit. These seats are incredibly supportive, both over longer distances in terms of overall comfort, but also in the corners. There's a decent amount of bolstering that'll give you the support necessary when you are enjoying this in the corners. These are not bolstered like you'd find in some more aggressive sports sedan that are constantly reminding you that getting in and out of those seats is a workout. I suspect for the segment, this steering wheel is slightly undersized, but it's perfect for this IS. The diameter is spot on. The shape and the size is perfect. It encourages you to have your hands at 9 and 3. Shift paddles are within easy reach, and overall, it's just the right kind of wheel for this kind of car. With this new 12.3-inch touchscreen, it seems like Lexus is reluctantly dragging this IS straight into the future. Thankfully, Lexus didn't force the rest of the cabin to come along with it. Climate controls are right here and they're proper switches. This interface is nice and quick because there's a fast processor that's obviously behind it. There's never any lag in the system whatsoever. The trackpad is thankfully gone, and that is a lovely thing to see. What we do have, however, is a volume scroll wheel here, and you do get used to that. A volume knob would be a lovely thing, but since that trackpad's gone, I'm not going to complain too much. And for me, Lexus solved the problems that I had with this interface with just the right amount of modern tech. The digital instrument cluster is clear, legible in all kinds of lighting conditions. It's all business, but you can configure it to display different information in different ways. Right now, I have the tach running across the top of the instrument cluster because with the 6-speed, it does love to hold on to its gears a little bit longer. As well, I've got the G meter on the left side of the instrument cluster. Yes, it would be fun to treat the G meter as a game to win, but we are on public roads after all. Forward visibility is excellent. Rearward visibility is exactly what you expect out of a sedan. And of course, this has cameras and sensors to keep you safe during your parking lot adventures. Yes, there are some compromises. Front row is spacious enough, and there's a decent amount of room for your various stuff, some storage space here, bottle holders in the doors, cup holders here, wireless charger here, and it all works very well. In the second row, however, that's where some of those compromises start to show. There's really not a lot of room back there. I can barely fit behind myself in this seating position, and I suppose that's true to the sports sedan ethos. Who cares about the backseat passengers? The trunk is on the tinier side. You can't fit a couple of golf bags in there for sure, but not much more than that. Speaking of things that are small in this IS, the fuel tank is 17.4 gallons, and if you drive like me, you're going to be stopping fairly frequently. And one thing that owners do complain about, there's a little bit of a bulge in the tunnel here for the all-wheel drive system, and to be fair, doesn't bother me in the least, but I understand it bothers some owners. If this episode gave you something more than a brochure or a press release, hit like. It tells YouTube to share this episode with other people like you interested in an episode like this. Takes just a second. That's what the IS told me after a week behind the wheel, and press cars get an easy week. Owners get years, and a few patterns start to emerge. Let's start with tires. Across current generation owner reports, the fronts can wear their inner edges long before the rest of the tire looks done, and owners don't treat it as a simple bad alignment story. Geometry and soft control arm bushings let toe move under load, so the fix owners talk about is stiffer bushings and custom alignment. On staggered F Sport rubber, you can't rotate your way out of it. The car charges you for staying stance, then bills you for knowing what stance does. The transmission that everyone talks about is also the reason why owners are comfortable keeping their ISs beyond 200,000 miles. The 6-speed and the V6 are old Toyota family hardware, and that age is part of the appeal. The thing that makes the IS look behind the times is also the thing that makes owners stop worrying about time. Owners are blunt about running cost, and fuel consumption runs in the high teens to low 20s. Plus, it wants premium fuel, and the all-wheel drive adds a front diff and transfer case that needs service their rear drive car never asks for. The recurring owner opinion is that the IS is worth it if you can afford to feed it. All of that separates the car Lexus loaned me from the one you would own, which leaves one question worth carrying into the verdict: whether the old hardware is worth the money. If you own one of these or have some quality seat time behind the wheel of one of these, let me know in the comments what I got right and what I got wrong, because real-world owner experiences are much more valuable than anything I can learn in a week-long press loan, and I always read those comments. So, which is it? Lexus refusing to modernize, or Lexus preserving the last authentic sports sedan? Annoyingly, both. The 6-speed and the tiny back seat come from the same engineering era as the steering weight and the brake feel. That same automotive engineering worldview built this car, one that's still filled with compromises, but now it's the best it's ever been. The latest sports sedan rivals win the spec sheet argument before this IS even gets to the table. Then when drivers get behind the wheel and start asking those important questions, this Lexus has answers. On a spec sheet comparison, this car inevitably loses, and the spec sheet shopper can keep walking. This is for the buyer who remembers what a naturally aspirated V6 does at 6,000 RPM, and then remembers that almost no one is building cars like this anymore. It's for the driver who's willing to pay luxury car money for something that has traditional mechanicals and treats the 6-speed automatic as the price of admission, not a deal breaker. And I think the size of that audience shrinks every year, which is why Lexus can still charge 60 grand for this thing. Sure, this IS is too old to fake modernity, but it turns out that's the whole point. Lexus calls this a sports sedan, and drive it like a sports sedan and it'll paint a smile on your face every time. It will depreciate like a Lexus, which is to say, slowly. The same old school approach to the mechanicals is the same reason long-term owners will trust it. In a lot of ways, this is the IS playing the last episode of a long-running show and going out and doing the things it was always good at doing instead of chasing a reboot that nobody asked for. That's the IS 350 all-wheel drive. Subscribe if you want to see more episodes like this. Don't if you don't. Comments are open if you disagree. And the merch store link is here if you want to help fund more of these. See you on the next one.